challenged himself to be the best he could all the days of his life. A third grade dropout daddy who was saying was boys, I don't have a problem if you aim high and miss, but I'm gonna have a real issue if you aim low and miss. A country mother quoting Harley Ford saying, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. I learned that from a third grade drop. Simple lessons. Lessons like this, son, you'd rather be an hour early than a minute late. We never knew what time was it was. My house was closed. The class always ahead. My house had nearly 30 years ago. My father left the house at 30:30 in the morning. One day she asked me why, Daddy. He said maybe one of my boys will teach me in the. I want to share Aristotle saying you are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be an habit, not an act. Don't ever forget them. I know you're tough. I know you are smart, but always remember to be kind. Always. Don't ever forget them. Never embarrass mama. Yeah. And if mommy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. If daddy ain't happy, then nobody cares. But I'm gonna tell you. Next lesson. A lesson from a cook over there in the gallery. Son, make sure your servant's tower is bigger than your ego. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pains of stupidity. You might have a relative in mind you want to send it to. Let me say it again. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. Pride is the burden of a foolish person. John Wooden coached basketball in UCLA for a living, but his calling was impact people. And with all those national championships, guess what he was found doing in the middle of the week? Going into the cupboard, grabbing a broom, and sweeping his own gym floor. You want to make an impact? Find your broom. Every day in your life, you find your broom. Grow your influence that way. That way you're attracting people so that you can impact them. Final lesson. Son, if you're going to do a job, do it right. I've always been told how average I can be. Always been criticized about being average. But I want to tell you something. I stand here before you, before all of these people, not listening to those words, but telling myself every single day to shoot for the stars, to be the best that I can be. Good enough isn't good enough if it can be better, and better isn't good enough if it can be best. Let me close with a very personal story that I think will bring all this into focus. Wisdom will come to you in the unlikeliest of sources. A lot of times through failure. When you hit rock bottom, remember this. While you're struggling, rock bottom can also be a great foundation on which to build and on which to grow. I'm not worried that you'll be successful. I'm worried that you won't fail from time to time. Person that gets up off the canvas and keeps growing. That's the person that will continue to grow their influence. Back in the 70s, to help me make this point, let me introduce you to someone. I'm at the finest woman I'd ever met in my life. Back in my day, we have called her a brick house. This woman was the finest woman I've ever seen in my life. There was just a little problem. Back in the day, ladies didn't like me or linemen. The blind side hadn't come out yet. They're like quarterbacks and running backs. We are at this dance. Trina Williams from Long Cove, California. We are all dancing and we are just excited. And I decided in the middle of the dancing with her that I would ask her for her phone number. Trina was the first one. Trina was the only one in college who gave me a real telephone number. The next day we walked to Baskin Robbins ice cream parlor. My friends couldn't believe it. This has been 40 years ago and my friends still can't believe it. We gone on a second date, and a third date, and a fourth date. We drive from Chico to Bellevue so that she could be my parents. My father missed her, my daddy, my hero. He missed her, forced me to the side, and is she psycho? But anyway, we go together 4 years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but by now, Trina's a senior in college. I'm still a freshman, but I'm working some things out. I'm so glad I graduated 4 times. Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan. So now it's time to propose. And I talked to her girlfriends. It's California, it's in the 70s, since I has to be outside, had a condo, and you have to have some chocolate. Listen, I'm from a hood. I had a bottle of Boone's Farm wine. That's what I had. She said yes. That was the key. I married the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. You're ever been to a wedding, and even before the wedding starts, you hear, how in the world? And it was coming from my side of the family. We get married, few children, our lives are great. One day, Trina finds a lump in her left breast. Breast cancer. 6 years after the diagnosis, me and my 2 little boys walked up to Mommy's casket. And for 2 years, my heart didn't beat. It wasn't for my faith in God, I wouldn't be standing here today. It wasn't for those 2 little boys, there would have been no reason for which to go on. I was completely lost. That was rock bottom. You know what sustained me? The wisdom of a 3rd grade dropout. The wisdom of a simple cook from California Maritime Academy. With that casket, I never seen my dad cry. But this time, I saw my dad cry. That was his daughter. Trina was his daughter, not his daughter-in-law. And I'm right behind my father, about to see her for the last time on this earth. And my father shared 3 words with me to change my life right there at the casket. It'll be the last lesson he would ever teach me. He said, son, just stand. You keep standing. You keep standing no matter how rough the sea. You keep standing. I'm not talking about just water. You keep standing no matter what. You don't give up. I learned the lesson from a 3rd grade dropout. And as clearly as I'm talking to you today, these were some of her last words to me. She looked me in the eyes and she said, it doesn't matter to me any longer how long I live. What matters to me most is how I live. Yeah, I ask you one question. I ask you one question. A question that I was asked all my life by a 3rd grade dropout. How you living? How you living? Every day, ask yourself the question, how you living? Here's what a cook in a dining center would just suggest you to live this way. That you not judge. That you show up early. That you be kind. That you make sure that servant's tower is huge and used. That if you're gonna do something, you do it the right way. That cook will tell you this, that it's never wrong to be the right thing. That how you do anything is how you do everything. In that way, you grow your influence to make it impact. In that way, you will honor all those who have gone before you, who have invested in you. From teachers to grandparents to mom and dad. And we combine that academic knowledge with that wisdom. Oh my goodness, you will change the world. So that the class of 2017, it is with great honor that I say all your life, Look in those unlikest places for wisdom. Enhance your life every day by seeking the wisdom and asking yourself every night, how am I living? May God richer bless you. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it, no big deal, just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of college after the first 6 months, but I stayed around as a drop-in for another 8 months or so before I really quit. So why did I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, awake graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents who were on a waiting list got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college, but I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working-class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and began dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned cooked bottles for the pints and repositories to buy food with. And I walked the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Lee College at the time offered the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label, and every drawer was beautifully handcrafted. Because I had to drop out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans-serif typefaces every poster, every label, and every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans-serif typefaces, about bearing them on a space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on a single course in college, the Mac would have never had the multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied on Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in the calligraphy class, and personal computers might have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards.
So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future.
You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the wrong path, and that will make all the difference. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it, no big deal, just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of college after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why did I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother found out later that my biological mother was a young, unwed college graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a wedding list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college, but I never chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford, and all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and began dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with, and I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at the time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans-serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any particular application or none of this had even a hope of any particular application. But 10 years later, when we designed first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. When we designed it all into the Mac, it was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped into the calligraphy class, and personal computers might have the wonderful typography that they did. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future.
When it leads you off the well-worn path. Something, your gut, dots looking forward. Connect the dots looking forward when I was in college. But calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the
Might have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking for it when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can connect the dots you're looking for, you can only connect them looking backwards, so you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, luck, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the wrong path, and that will make all the difference. My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I love to do early in life. Wasn't I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as a grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we ended up falling out. When we did, our board director started with him, and so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I dropped the baton as it was being passed me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyes trying to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still love what I did. The ton of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. 오늘 너무 열심히 했어. 또 20분 넘었네. 이러면 안 되는데 이거. 지속 가능한 페이스로 가자고. 너무 오버하면은 또 내일 힘들어. 그냥 대충 하루 단 5분씩이라도 하면은 그 습관이 지속되니까 keep going is very important. Okay? Important. So I have to be. You don't have to trust in something. You've got destiny, life, and karma. Although I memorized these speeches, actually I don't know what this means exactly. The only thing that I can feel is just some ambiguous meaning. Maybe this man wanna tell this kind of thing. So in the future, I have to do some analysis that this speech sentence by sentence. Maybe in 2021. I hope. Anyway, I did my best. Today also I did really, really great. I'm proud of myself. Anyway, I will do next thing. Bye.